glasses on.
Hi, I'm Steph. I'm the literary manager at the Almeida, and I'm here with Ella Hickson, the writer of The Writer, and Blanche McIntyre, who's the director of The Writer. So there's a sort of slight irony in doing a kind of discussion event about this play, I think. So I'm slightly self-conscious about that, but we're just going to do a chat about the play and about the production and a bit about Ella and Blanche's work in general. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So, yeah. So if anyone... Can I just check who has seen the show already?
Wow.
Oh, great.
Okay, all right.
And is there anyone else who's sort of seeing it tonight or later on?
So no spoilers.
So be aware of spoilers, I guess, is the thing. So for those of you who don't know, The Writer is very much sort of set within the theatre space and within the theatre industry. It's about a female playwright who, and sort of the ways in which the patriarchal and capitalist system, which we see through her relationships romantically and professionally, impacts on her writing. And it's very sort of galvanising play for the audience. We've had like a lot of response to it. I was really struck by that at press night. I'm normally kind of quite used to press nights where everyone goes out, gets a gin and tonic, talks about the play for 5 minutes, and then sort of moves on to like, how was your holiday? But this play, everyone was talking about it all night after the show. And so I kind of wanted to ask you at first, what was the sort of impulse originally behind writing this play now, and what was the sort of genesis of the play?
So it's a bit of a funny thing, because I wrote it last summer. It was originally going to be called These Little Ones. And I went away to America for a retreat for 8 weeks. And it was the first time, really, ever, I gave myself total free rein. So I was just like, you've got 8 weeks. It was an open commission. It wasn't even... I mean, it was for the space in my head. I knew that I wanted to write it for this space. But I just wanted full ownership. I just really wanted... I felt like I had been writing to deliver for sort of 10 years. And I was like, I'm going to write something that's just for me. If I had to write just one thing and nobody even saw it, like, what would it be if it was all mine? And then I just gave myself... I did loads of sort of, like, automatic writing and wrote down lots of my dreams, you know, all the proper, like, woo-woo stuff. And, yeah, and the first scene pretty much came out pat, like it just from the top to the bottom. Yeah, so it came, I suppose, from quite an instinctive place, and it was pre-Weinstein, so I actually handed it in, and then a couple of days later Weinstein broke, so I certainly wasn't... I was angry, let's be clear. Really angry. Yeah, I'd been in the industry for 10 years, and a lot of how I started was... I mean, you've seen the play. Yeah, so I certainly had an anger, but I think it was less about I think it was less about men in the industry and more about restriction and feeling that artistry was hitting up quite hard against creative control in a lot of venues, and that felt quite destructive and like commercial values as well. Like I was being asked to write treatments for theatres and things like that, and I was just livid. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, I'm really interested in sort of the challenge in general that the play sets up, because, you know, very early on in the play, a character introduces the idea of dead theatre at the moment, plays in which people go and then the audience leave and they're entirely unchanged. And I feel like if you set that up in the beginning as an example of these are things that don't work, the rest of the play almost has to be an antidote to that. It has to challenge that. So I'm kind of interested in both of you, both in the writing and in the rehearsal process, how you sort of rose to meet that challenge that the play had almost set itself, and how to not be that thing.
I've never experienced such a political rehearsal process. It was extraordinary. It was almost, we spent more time talking about abstract concepts, how they work in real-life systems, but also what we understand by them, and the company feeding in with their ideas and experiences of that, than I did working on the actual scenes. Because this is a play which, I think more than any play that I've done, every word, every moment, every gesture has a political can be read in a political way. Every choice that we made had a bigger resonance. And so everything had to be scrutinised not just from the point of view of whether it worked theatrically, but also of the specific thing that raised hand, look, scene change, gesture, word was trying to do.
And do you feel when you do that there's a difficulty or a challenge in sort of balancing both the fact that these characters often have to stand for political concepts, they also are impeded by the form that they're working in to a certain extent, but then we as an audience want to have an authentic human response to sort of the real drama of the characters. And there's quite a lot going on there. And how do you sort of work with actors to sort of get the real authentic relationships working while there's a lot of other things sort of on the characters?
Well, I guess there's a really easy answer, which is that it's in the detail of the writing, that the way a line is phrased, the way a character phrases a thought tells you something about them. You've got to be true to that as well. You're right, it's a balancing act, but you can't throw that away. That's a key thing. There's a phrase, now tell me if this is a misquote, but there is something that...
She knows every word of the play off by heart and did by like week two.
It's not about the play, it's something that you said. It's something along the lines of that naturalism is itself a political choice.
Yes, yeah.
And so if you are writing a play in which it purely is about the characters and their interactions and nothing else, then that is just as much a choice as if you are trying to explore the way that life is lived in a more abstract way or in a more artistically chosen way.
It's really interesting. That was actually one of the things when I sat down to write it initially last summer. I remember just the exhaustion of naturalism. Like I went to sort of write an opening scene and I was like, front row minute, fuck, I just don't care. I just don't care. I just didn't care. And it's why in the thing there's that thing of like, two people walk on stage and they say hi, hi. I just got to the point where I looked at, it's like my 10th or 11th play and I was just like, I just cannot have two people walking on stage being like, hey, hey, and like all that kind of weird subtext. And, it's all hidden away. And I thought, why is it all hidden away? I've been taught that they're not allowed to say what they think. Well, what if they do? And yeah, I just sort of really wanted to break things, like in a really, really strong way. And I guess it was a frustration with the kind of... I remember when I wrote Wendy and Peter Pan, so many people got angry with me about the... you can't do that to Peter Pan. And also you can't put feminism into children's literature. You can't put politics into shows for kids. And then they'd be it's everyone loves the original Peter Pan. And I was like, you're telling me that Disney Peter Pan doesn't have politics in it? Like... That's what's so weird is people don't see that normal is so imbued with patriarchy and capitalism and heteronormativity and like we are swallowing gallons and gallons of politics every day and just told that they're normal.
It's that argument about taste as well in the play that I think is really interesting because obviously the writer she's sort of constantly talking about why we like what we like. She sort of mentions to one character at one point, is it because of your upbringing or because of your relationship with your mother? And I'm sort of interested in that idea because as a literary manager, I'm reading plays and the thing that she points out is sort of sparky dialectic back and forth argument as something that we think of as, oh, that's good drama, but it's because maybe we've been handed down that as part of the sort of Western canon. But at the same time, when I'm reading plays, there's that, but there's also like a lot of other things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for, does one scene lead to the next? What do characters have to lose and gain? How does that change? And so I'm sort of interested because those are what we call good dramaturgy. And I sort of want to explore your sense more of this idea that do you believe that those really are socially constructed and that there might be other forms that we just haven't discovered yet that are more feminine, more intuitive? And how does that play into your writing, either with this play but maybe what you're writing going forward?
Yes, so it's really interesting this. I hear this, my big argument with this is casting. Like, you will find people, like directors who are casting shows, if you're trying to write lots of characters that are not Western, it gets there eventually, and everyone sounds a bit like, and then eventually the director will say, there's just not enough good actors that are, and you just go, what the hell does good mean in that context? And I think, obviously, you write within a culture, and that culture, through education, through society, fills you full of a lot of preconceptions, and those preconceptions all have value judgments on them. So it's really hard to unpick this, like, right back to the bones. But I think about feminism, there is an interesting thing, or women writing, let's say, like part feminism. It is interesting to me that the majority of women who have had a writing career of any length have attempted to break form quite quickly. And whether that's just a product of being, say, minority or oppressed in some way, that you've just got a centralised, like, hegemonic form and you don't feel like you're part of that centre, so you just want to break and it doesn't really matter how you break. My instinct is not that. My instinct is that when I let myself write what I want to write, it doesn't behave in the way that I was taught to write, which is interesting to me because of the men that I know that write, they do write the way that they feel, how they feel they want to write and how they were taught to write are closer, and they find it much more pleasant. Lots of the women I know struggle much, much more with the writing process. It's really unpleasant. Potentially confidence to speak, potentially socialise things around gender. I mean, there's lots of different reasons.
And those sort of examples of women who have sort of broken dramatic form historically, are there any sort of really good examples?
Churchill.
Yeah.
Who I saw in the park yesterday. It's like a brilliant god. Yes, Carol Churchill has. I mean, even novel, like Jean Rhys, I always think it's really interesting when the 20s came, like Virginia Woolf was huge when I was writing this. It was really interesting. I read... I've read loads of Virginia Woolf, I read loads of Jeanette Winterson, like magic realism, Toni Morrison, like everybody, like it's all magic realism, it's all myth, it's all kind of, it breaks with the, read loads of Churchill, read loads of brilliant playwright Alice Birch. So I just kept everyone that sort of felt like they were home, just naturally had form breaking in their bones. And then I weirdly read, because I was interested in plays about artists, which is now on in the West End. And it was really fascinating. I was like, you're writing about an abstract painter. Gives us some abstraction, and then just didn't. It was kind of...
It's interesting, like you're saying, Red is, on at the moment, and I feel like I'm reading in stuff that I'm getting, but also I feel like there is a slight sort of preoccupation at the moment with deconstructing form in new writing. I'm thinking of and often it is to reveal structural inequality. So like Brandon Jacobs Jenkins and Octoroon it's a deconstruction of a 19th century melodrama in order to talk about the representation of race in theatre. I'm also reading quite a lot of plays where the subject matter is art and the form of the play is a deconstruction of that art. And obviously you're a kind of forerunner of that and a very good example. But I wonder if there's anything about the sort of temperature of the time you think that there's a reason why writers and artists are particularly wanting to sort of reveal these things and break form in order to do it.
I don't know if this is right. My friend Punny Morell, who used to run the Unicorn, had a theory about why on the continent theatre was much less in hoc to narrative and much more experimental and much more inclined to tear up the classics. Her theory, which I don't know if it's right or not, was that she might be here. Was that the events of the 20th century on the continent were so traumatic that narrative became insufficient as a way of explaining them. That you can't, when you're looking back to horrendous things in your national past, a simple, nice, neat story simply isn't enough. And so theatre evolved in a different direction to. Because of that, and I guess we are living at the moment. We had a very nice, neat national myth until quite recently, and we are now, as a country, living through some pretty turbulent times, and the West, more broadly is as well. So I can see that it might be that traditional narratives feel a little bit unsatisfying, especially...
And maybe not even just unsatisfying, but it sort of suggests that also they were contributing to the problems, as in a certain form of narrative making is what forms some of those issues.
Yes,
it's extraordinary the lack of shift in theatre in this country. Like, you're still looking at sort of naturalistic 3-act plays as the norm, as everything. And it's getting worse, actually. I say worse. It's getting more. It's getting more. But yeah, so abstract expressionism straight after the Second World War, which is part of why Guernica is in the play, because that feels like the last historical touch point for me in terms of what we're trying to do now. So like Giacometti, you just sort of couldn't do, so like Jackson Pollock, Giacometti, Guernica, like Picasso, like everybody, you see that, I mean, Picasso's reached into something a bit earlier, but that level of, like, and you see that, I think when you see piles of bodies out the back of like Auschwitz and things like that, you can't then go and write plays, or you can't then go and paint pictures where people are sitting with fruit baskets looking lovingly at each other. You just sort of can't do it. And it feels like we're in such an exciting cultural moment at the moment about voice, like voice coming from places that it hasn't come from before and no longer being dismissible. You know, like all of the, like Dear White People is one of the like biggest shows on Netflix. Like we talked last time we did one of these panels about a huge queer movement that's coming through, and it feels really mainstream now. Like you can, and what feels fascinating in a lot of the reactions we've had to the play is that a sort of heteronormative white male of a certain age, I think the violence of the reaction to the play often is about feeling threatened, and it's like that is real. Like that means this is really a moment where things are changing and people are properly, the centre is scared it's moving. What takes its place? Yeah. I don't know.
Well, as a writer, do you feel the sort of responsibility to discover or propose what takes its place?
Existential crisis is what that face is. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a really interesting thing. I was incredibly confident when I wrote the play and incredibly confident when it opened. And when I watch the play, I feel totally fine, and it's all cool, and I like agree with all of it. I write all the characters. I should remind you, the director, and like the men and the women. I'm confused now. A lot of offers have come in since the play has opened that are sort of relatively commercial. And I should say no, but the other argument that the play makes is that you are completely beholden to a commercial system. Like, we actually haven't made space. We might have made space socially outside of the patriarchy, but we certainly haven't made space financially. And, you know, there's a deep terror in me about that. Like, I need to live. I can live. I'm fine. I'd be absolutely fine if I said no to them. I don't know what I'm playing at. Yeah, I don't know.
Before we take questions from the audience, can I just ask about sex for a little bit? Because I'm kind of interested in the play, because it's another challenge that the play sets up in a way. In the beginning, early on, there's an argument about the idea that seeing a woman, seeing sex on stage, or even seeing a woman's body on stage is inherently sort of objectifying or exploitative, just because we, as a culture, cannot sort of look at a woman without objectifying her, because it's so much part of it. And it sort of made me think about sort of the way we're talking now about sex in rehearsal rooms, on stage, with sort of the idea of like intimacy directors being introduced, or sort of code of conduct in rehearsal rooms. And I sort of wanted to ask you if you felt there's a difference, there needs to be a difference in approaching that kind of action, whether it's the same as any other action on stage, or if it's sort of, there is a more of a responsibility because it's more loaded because of this sort of culture of objectifying women.
Yes, I mean, well, yes is the answer. It was, of course, easier in this play to have the conversations around it than it would be in something more straightforwardly naturalistic, let's say, because you can stylize, you can do other things to make it all right, and of course, it's always got to be whatever it is, what actors are comfortable with. But in fact, it's less the culture of objectifying women per se that was on my mind when we were working through it, although of course that is a key thing. But the stories that come out when you're rehearsing any kind of intimate scene about what has gone on in previous shows, in previous productions, where so-and-so has behaved like this, and the theatre hasn't been able to stop him or her, normally him, and the director couldn't do it, and there is a sense sometimes I think that it's okay to make this move because we're acting and, hey, I'm in the moment. I just got carried away when I put my hand here, put my tongue there. And so I think it's less, it is obviously, of course it has to be about the importance of the picture that you make and the story that you tell, but there's a really basic human care element that we also had to be really mindful of.
I was just interested in it in terms of this particular play, I thought. Should we, is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Great.
I saw it during previews and I absolutely adored it. And as an audience member, what really struck me as, while watching it, was I never quite knew what the rules were. Watching it, like when you finish the first scene or it's the second scene, you realise, oh, that's what the first scene's about, and so on and so forth, and how unique as an overall production it was. I just wondered, from your processes, usually as a writer and a director, how that differed for this production due to how specifically unique it was. Like, I know every show is unique, and as a writer and director, you tackle that differently anyway, but this really struck me as being probably different to anything that you've written before, anything that you've directed before, and I just wondered what that was like.
It definitely was. I mean, for me, it was a case of trying to keep in mind. And I don't normally you can only play one thing at once when you're on the stage, but all the actors here are playing 3 or 4 things, 3 or 4 levels of awareness, and how to, sometimes it's just a matter of all of us being aware of it, sometimes it's the thing that you really have to place. So we had to be very constantly alive to the fact that we were trying to communicate on more than one level and keep that part of the conversation.
As to write it, the meta of it felt oddly instinctive, only that you just couldn't, it's from that original thing of like just being incredibly bored with making an assumption about naturalism. Yeah. So by the time you're really, really bored to the back teeth of that, you sort of just can't ever let a scene drop. You're always keeping the ball in the air. Because I just don't know what this play would be with a scene that you were being asked to believe in a sort of sense of theatrical naturalism. So it felt quite straightforward, weirdly, the meta. I sort of wrote it as I knew what the feeling of each. I suppose that's actually what you were speaking to before. I write in quite a sort of emotionally instinctive way, rather than if I was trying to use my, brain. Didn't use my brain at all. But if you followed the logic of it, it's funny, when I started the process, I read 2 books on playwriting, which I hadn't read since I began. And I read them both, and sort of thought, I should do that thing where I draw the graph and I should work out what all the protagonists are doing, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, I'm just going to pick my scenes instinctively. And that's, just what it happened as.
Great. Anybody else?
Oh. When you were casting and directing, did you have a clear image of what you wanted, or did you sort of just let the actors run with it and bring their own ideas, or did you have a clear image?
Well, for me, it's odd. It's not so much a clear image of what I wanted, but a clear image of how it sounded. So not a visual thing, but the company that we have is extraordinary for many reasons. But one of the things is that they are all of them brilliant at text, and with a text like this, you've got to be so sharp on it that it had to be absolutely acutely observed and very lightly handled. And so often when we were meeting people, I think Ella probably had a different set of expectations, but a lot of what I was listening for was if the thoughts are there, if the corners can be made, and that was more important than what the look or what the actors, how they related to each other physically or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're so lucky with it. I mean, we've just got the best cast in the world.
We do.
We love them an awful lot. The height, size was an interesting thing. There's quite a lot in the play about size and about women and size. And if you look in Spotlight for actors over a certain size, if you ever doubt that there is a sort of homogenization going on what you're seeing on screen and stage, type like 5'11" into Spotlight for a woman and see what happens. Very few. And it's interesting, so lots of that was in there that we had to kind of get the dynamics right. I also always have a kind of odd conversation with myself about in this case, actually, weirdly, more masculinity than femininity. I think there's an interesting thing, because obviously masculinity is so placed in the play in quite a sort of conscientious way. And so you were sort of looking at actors with that in mind as well, which I had to do for Oil as well, actually. And it's a really interesting thing how men are taught that they need to behave masculinity, and how masculinity actually reads. I say that like I'm an authority on masculinity.
But then it's... Oh, sorry.
No,
well, I was just going to say, it's not always necessarily masculinity, though. There was I remember one actor that we met and who we were talking about status and the high status of the character, and she said, I find it, I can't do that. Yes. I find that really terribly difficult. And that was an extraordinary moment, that it's not necessarily masculinity as such, but qualities like the ability to carry status or the ability to hold one's ground, which automatically we allied with masculinity. And that separating those things out, that's always
and devastating what it said about norms, like women coming in and being like, I've never played higher status than an older man on stage. I've got no idea how to do it. And you're like, that is an entire theatrical canon, and you have never been in a situation where you've been asked to play higher status. It just, shocking in a way. Not in another way.
Any other questions?
Hey, I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about the myth of Semele, because I loved the play so much, and it was electric, and the arguments on either side were absolutely brilliant. I loved the way you pulled the rug and everyone needed to keep up in terms of our thoughts, the audience's thoughts, keeping going. And just that myth I wasn't familiar with, and you've been talking about naturalism and not naturalism, so obviously that plays into it. But why that myth? Why name check it? What was going on there?
Really good question. Interesting question, considering the two ladies on my side, who both actually sort of felt, and it's interesting every time I watch it, am I allowed to say this?
Yeah.
That they both sort of felt like, take the Semele out. No, it's fine.
It's a really interesting,
it's fine. Yeah, we talked about it a lot. I guess for me, what I was interested in, a lot of that middle section was based on kind of some of the more formally instinctive stuff that I'd read in, like Virginia Woolf and Jeanette Winterson and things like that. But there was one particular story of Blanche, like a massive classicist, so I'm going to get like smited from my left. But I was reading about, I just was interested in the origins of theatre, so like the first theatre ever. So I was reading quite a lot of that as well. And the idea that, like, if an origin story was reclaimed, I guess, if the birth of art, I think there was a thing about, like, if we were all sitting around the campfire at the beginning, the birth of art has kind of been given to the guys. And so if we're going to go all the way back to reclaim it, to say that there were also women sitting at the campfire, which you've got a great story that they were. So the first handprints on cave
yes.
walls.
I think this isn't my story. This is just, I think I read it in The Guardian. So it must be true. But I think there's the Extraordinary Handprints at Lascaux and at various other underground caves. It looks as though they were made by women, not by men. Judging something about the particular physiognomy of the hands, the size, the particular way that they're put together, people think that this was a female thing.
Yeah, and the original myth of Semele is that
she's I'm so sorry. I'm going to do proper geek with this because there's something about it that I also love. She is one of Zeus's many lovers, Zeus, the king of the gods, and Zeus's jealous wife is always at the bottom of the trouble. Persuades her that the next time Zeus comes to her, she must make him swear to do whatever she wants, then ask to see him in his full glory. And of course he does, regretfully, and she is immediately charred. She immediately becomes ash because it's not possible to stand up to his glory. But she is pregnant, and so he snatches the unborn child in the moment that she's incinerated, sews him into his thigh, and the child's then born 9 months later as Dionysus, the god of theatre, the god of wine. I think probably the god of putting oneself down and engaging in something communal, among other things. there is something that I particularly like about this story, speaking as a monumental geek, that when I read Ella's play for the first time, it felt to me as though this was a kind of Greek play, or in Greek theatre style, in that it is partly calibrated to send people out debating and questioning and arguing and being challenged on what they think. And that was the function of theatre back in the day, to upend what's inside you. And one of the ways that it did this was to take existing myths and completely rewrite them. So what if so-and-so didn't die after all? What if what if so-and-so founded a city or survived or did this or that? As a way of making you think. And so one of the things that I love about the Semele myth is that Ella's taken it and completely turned it in a way that's absolutely appropriate for a kind of theatre that is meant to make you question yourself.
Yeah, so going back, absolutely that. And also, actually, I should say, David Gregg is like a mentor of mine and like a really good pal. And I was saying to him, we sort of sat in Green Park one afternoon, and I just said to him, I've got to the point where I just hate theatre. Like, everything I go and see, it's awful. We just, like, walked through the West End just being, like, sad. And I was, he sort of taught me about theatre in the first place, and I really believed in it. And we did this weird Dionysian ceremony, which is actually at the beginning of Suppliant Women, which he'd just written. And so we got, like, half a can of Foster's, and we... cut it in half, and then you have to write your artistic ambitions for the next piece of holy fire, and you write them down, and then you set fire to them, and then you pour wine all around it. And so we just did it. We just did this big, like, Dionysian ceremony about the fact that I hated art, and I didn't know how to bring it back to life. And I then watched Suppliant Women, and so it was sort of part of trying to bring back to life a sense of theatre that has sort of died in me. Sad.
Any other questions?
Could you speak about the play's route to this production? You said something about an open commission. I'm not really sure what that is, and how it got to Blanche the stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So an open commission is a brilliant thing, which is that it's a theatre that just gives you a commission, gives you a bit of money and says, go and write whatever you like. It doesn't mean they're going to put it on, but it just means I'm not going to tell you what to write, or you don't have to sell me the idea before I give you the money, basically. And I'd been here before with oil, and I knew, I'd spent a long time, like oil took like 6 years or whatever it was, hellish amount of time. And I sort of knew the space in my mind, and I knew the theatre, and Rupert, who commissioned me, I've known for years, and he and Rob, who sort of run the theatre, have really been my like constants, I guess, through the sort of first decade of my career. And so I went away with this like gift from them to be like, go and write what you like, and wrote it very quickly. I wrote it in sort of 4 or 5 weeks, and haven't really touched it since that first draft. And then I sent it in. I emailed it I didn't tell anyone what I was writing at all, and then I just sent this slightly precocious email to Rupert out of the middle of nowhere, just being like, here it is. And then just didn't check my emails and got on a plane, and by the time I'd landed, because I had to do some meetings in New York, and then by the time I landed back in London, he'd read it, and then Weinstein had broken, and then it was actually the opening night of Albion, and so I came in, and Rob and Rupert both were just sort of like, this is incredible timing. And we had a reading quite quickly, and they sort of decided that they wanted to do it, which was great. It felt like the energy I'd put into writing had been the energy that they had like picked up and ran with, which felt amazing. And I think more theatre should do. They're great here because they program really late. They leave things like deliciously, terrifyingly to the last minute, which means that if something does land like this, it just happens to be timely. And then we were thinking about directors and, who would it be? And Rupert had a relationship with...
He and I had been talking because this was the first time that I worked here. And so he was talking about this play or this play and said, actually, this is a bit of a wild card, but I'll just send you this one and see what you think of it. And I read it and immediately called him back and went, please let me pitch for this. This is brilliant. I really want to do it. This is unlike anything I've ever read, and please, God, give me the chance. So he sort of match-made us, and we had a cup of tea and a talk. And you were meeting a couple of other directors as well, and you said it's Ella's Because it is the writer who needs to feel safe with the director rather than the other way around, of course. So it was...
We basically just massively geeked out.
We did.
Yeah.
It was great.
We just met in the Young Vic and then had a massive geek club in. And then that was the play. And then we talked about casting and got it on. And it's been amazingly quick. And I just think, that has reinstilled my faith in theatre a little bit. Again, I have no idea what's next, but we'll see.
Hi. I always loved that your work so far is really politically charged and highly intelligent, but really nuanced. And for me, it's always the most exciting things that I read and get to watch are the ones that allow me to decide how I feel on that given day and respond to it in that moment. And I think that's really important for me for theatre. But with that though, particularly considering you said about turbulent times and everything feels very, very volatile and kind of crazy at the moment, when you're responding to that in the directing and writing process, how do you make sure that you still remember that the audience have to have their own opinion and respond in their own way? How do you not lead them, I guess, take them by the hand and tell them how to think? How do you have such a clear standpoint and yet have a distance from it as a writer, as a director?
It's weird, this play, because it has turned out to be very political, where it was written very personally. Like, it's hugely personal in a lot of ways as well. Not necessarily biographical, but personal. So the politics has been slightly by mistake. Or indeed, I just think it's a case of if you are truly honest about what goes on inside your body and mind, if you are not the central power holder in society, then it will inevitably be political and revolutionary because you will be voicing things that demand change. Somebody always has to be at the top of the pile. If it's not you, then you will sound angry. It's just usually the person at the top of the pile that's speaking. There was nothing conscientious about the plot. Like, the reaction to it has been, I literally wrote it in a cabin in the middle of the woods, in the middle of an American forest. I had the same breakfast, lunch and dinner almost every day for 8 weeks. I ran a hiking society in the afternoon and spoke to no one but the 20 people I was living with. So the idea that I was trying to, it wasn't intentionally, I wasn't really thinking about anyone, I was about to say anyone other than myself. That's not true.
But you can only write from there, can't you? You can't You can't outsource your feelings.
To someone, I don't know, you ever conscientiously political? I don't know. What's scarier is that you just say something that you think is true. Like, you just say what literally is in your mind, and then it turns out to make people incredibly angry. Like, I've sat in the audience next to people watching this play that have been like, for fuck's sake. And you just think, Jesus, that's literally just me before bed, just being like, that's what's just running through my mind, and it makes you that angry. And that's been kind of terrifying, totally proof of the patriarchy, like it exists, like the violence of some of the reactions to it has been shocking. And you go, wow, what is on the inside of me in quite a quiet way makes you really angry. I'm really sorry for existing. I'm absolutely not sorry for existing. So it's. I don't think anything is ever intentionally political in that way. I don't know.
No, and I don't think. I think even if it was, I'm afraid this is a really boring answer. Even if it was, it wouldn't be possible to hold the person's hand any more than they choose to be held. And I remember having a conversation with Ella, sort of describing the process of making a play independent, which of course she knows all about. That she gives it to me, and I give it to the actors, and the actors give it to the audience, and they decide what it's about. And there's nothing we can do. You could decide it's about whatever you like, and I think probably people will come away. Everyone who watches it will come away thinking it's about something different. But you really you can't. That's one of the brilliant things about audiences, that there's, even if we hammered home a point, it would still not be possible to change what's in your head.
Yeah, I guess what's interesting about this, I was just thinking, it wasn't conscientiously political, because all I did was very quietly and by myself, for the first time in my life, I just wrote what I wanted. I just did what I wanted. And I really heard that and just nothing else, no shoulds, no it has to look this way, no rules, no history, just this is what I want. And the fact that that has caused this reaction makes you realise how little of what people actually want to say and what women particularly want to feel and do in the world is ever expressed. And that's a bit terrifying, I think.
I'm kind of interested then, because we're probably going to finish up quite soon, but because to come back to this idea of the challenge that the play sets itself, and having a character sort of early on say, oh, I'm not moved by theatre at the moment. If you were to envisage the sort of ideal taxi journey home of two people that have come to the show tonight, or the behaviour of someone in the week after they've seen the show, or their internal feeling after the show, what would be sort of your ideal version of what this play does for someone to come and see it?
I really hope it activates your wanting in the world, but I'm really sorry about how quickly anxious and defeating that will make you feel as women. Like, I've felt that in the last couple of weeks. Like, I don't really know. I keep wondering whether, like, do I run a theatre? Do I start a group? What do you do? But the force is huge that you're up against. Like, it's really exciting that people have reacted in the way that they have. And I do believe in new spaces. I do believe in, like, getting a tribe together. And I know lots of practitioners that feel the same. But the job is huge. And you have to just start somewhere, I guess. But, yeah, new forms have remained outliers. And just look what's in the West. I mean, there is no reason, if women are relentlessly producing new and abstract forms, there's no reason that abstraction shouldn't be in the West End and naturalism is.
It's in the galleries and it's in the concert halls.
Yeah. So why, I mean, not that the West End matters in that way, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You mentioned about the problems of patriarchy now having a space and the problems regarding the economy not. Is that something that you might tackle in the future?
I feel so disappointed because what I've currently got on my desk is like... I don't know the answer. I'm more confused at the moment about what comes next than anything. I'm actually going on retreat again in like 2 weeks for a month. Maybe we'll hear what... I have to say, I do think there is I think this play is a clear voice. I think it's a really clear shout of like rage, and I think it's a clear want. But it is a little solipsistic. Like I don't know if it's enough just for like hyper individual. I don't know how political, in a real sense, hyper individualization is. Like, yes, it's a woman standing on stage and going, this is me, this is what I want, and I will not apologize for any of it, which is great. It's a really strong statement, and more women need to do that. But I don't know where that goes next. Like, I don't know what it's hard. Like, that feels, yes, a little bit individualistic and a little bit solipsistic, and I think there needs to be something structurally that moves forward. But at the moment you engage structurally, you engage with compromise, and you realise the size of the challenge, and you realise how hard deconstructing something that is as embedded as it is. I might run a venue, I don't know. I keep feeling like something, or don't know, pass. Don't know the answer.
Sorry.
I was just wondering about this idea of like abstraction and female writing, because obviously there have been a few plays in the last few years that are abstract plays written by men. So is abstraction just not something that female writers can or sort of seemingly allowed to do? Do you feel as a writer, when you write in a different way, people relate it to your female experience? It's like it's a part of being a female playwright rather than it just being a different way of writing?
I agree with you that I think men often, and I know lots of men that are just as capable of abstract expression and have been, and are brilliant, and there's lots of male playwrights I know that have done a similar thing, that have sort of followed an instinct rather than applying the rules, so to speak. I think what's interesting is we're told to follow the rules, otherwise we lose the audience. And what's interesting, and that was obviously a concern, but what's interesting about this play is I don't think we do. You do feel the audience sort of up with you the whole time. So that threat feels not true. I think, I don't know, does it breed a new generation of people that just get up and write what they want, whatever they... I want people to find new forms that relate to their specific emotional experience of the world. I think that's your job as a writer. I don't understand the thing of having an idea about a thing and then fitting it into a form that you've inherited from somebody else. I think form is your job as much as content. And I think form is where you're political, because if you want to say a thing about the world, then say it in a shape that lets us know what you want the world to look like. And I guess what the writer does that is halfway there, but a little bit lazy potentially still, is it constantly says, look, and look again, and look again, and look again, but it doesn't go, here's the answer.
But I think that's quite a good place to end it on, because I think that's quite a good provocation that the play does, which is crack it open, and then there's another stage after that. Yeah. And like that's a really important stage, isn't it? The breaking open a form to realise what it is, and then there's
what comes next.
What comes next. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the show tonight if you're staying around.